My wife said her coworker was like a brother until I heard my own voice in her phone, that I realized I wasn't just being replaced in my marriage. I was being scientifically harvested to create a better version of myself. Hey everyone, before we get in the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is Michael, and I am 34 years old. For the first 5 years of our marriage, I believe that Elena and I were the kind of couple others envied. We met in college during a literature seminar, a whirlwind romance that survived the grind of entry-level jobs and the transition into adulthood. We purchased our first home 3 years ago, a modest suburban structure with a white picket fence that felt like a tangible representation of our commitment. But like a slow-moving termite infestation, the decay began unnoticed, deep within the woodwork, hidden behind a coat of fresh paint. The trouble started, or rather, I first noticed it about 6 months ago. That was when Marcus entered the periphery of our lives. Elena worked as a project manager at a tech firm, a high-stress environment that often demanded late nights. She had always been dedicated, but suddenly she was bringing work home in the form of a specific colleague. At first, it was just his name dropped in conversation during dinner. Marcus said that. I dismissed it as the natural result of spending 40 hours a week with someone. But then, the jokes began. It happened at a dinner party with friends. Someone made a light-hearted comment about the amount of time Elena was spending at the office, hinting at the cliché of the workplace affair. I expected Elena to brush it off or deny it. Instead, she laughed. It was a sound I hadn't heard in a while, genuine, unburdened. She threw her head back and insisted that everyone had it wrong. She told the table, with absolute conviction, that Marcus was like a brother to her. The room relaxed, the tension dissipating instantly. After all, if he was family, there was no threat. I wanted to believe her. I did believe her mostly. But as the weeks turned into months, the brotherly dynamic began to feel like a shield she was hiding behind. It was a perfect deflection. How could I be jealous of a sibling figure? To question their friendship would make me seem insecure, controlling, and paranoid. Elena knew this, and she used it masterfully. Whenever I asked about her day, the answer inevitably circled back to him. They had lunch together every day. They carpooled to save on gas. They texted late into the night about upcoming deadlines. I began to notice subtle shifts in her behavior. She started dressing differently for work. Not necessarily sexier, but more meticulously. She began wearing a perfume I had bought for our anniversary 3 years ago, a scent she had claimed was too strong for daily wear and saved for special occasions. Now, Marcus was getting the special occasion version of my wife 5 days a week. The distance between us grew, measured not in miles but in silence. At home, she was exhausted, withdrawn, her phone always face down on the kitchen counter. If I reached for it, even to check the time, she would tense up, her eyes tracking my hand until I pulled away. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself that, like a brother, meant exactly that. But deep in my gut, a cold knot of dread was forming. I felt like an intruder in my own life, watching the woman I love drift away toward a man I didn't know, protected by a label that made my suspicions seem absurd. The erosion of our marriage wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a slow, suffocating leak. It was the small things that went missing first. The intimacy we shared, the lingering touches, the inside jokes, the comfort of sitting in silence without the need for filler conversation, evaporated. Elena became a ghost in her own home, present in body but entirely absent in mind. She would sit on the couch with me, her eyes glued to the television screen, but I could see her thumbs moving frantically against the phone resting on her lap. I tried to bridge the gap. I planned date nights, cooked her favorite meals, and attempted to engage her in conversations about our future, the house, vacations, maybe starting a family. Each attempt was met with a polite but hollow smile. She would nod and agree, her voice lacking any inflection, before glancing back at her device. The Marcus narrative continued, evolving from a work necessity to a personal confidant. She told me he was going through a tough divorce, that he needed a friend. I played the supportive husband role, offering sympathy, even as I watch her emotional energy pour entirely into him. The paranoia began to consume me. I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, wondering if she was dreaming of me or him. I started checking the mileage on her car when she got home, calculating if the distance matched her commute. It never seemed to add up quite right, but there was never enough discrepancy to constitute concrete proof. She was careful, too careful. One evening, I came home early from work to find her in the backyard, sitting on the patio furniture, laughing on the phone. The sliding glass door was closed, but through the screen, I could hear her voice. It was the laugh I used to provoke, the one that crinkled the corners of her eyes. She hadn't laughed like that with me in months. I watched from the shadows of the kitchen, unseen, as she gestured wildly, completely engrossed in the conversation. When she finally said goodbye and hung up, she sat there for a long time, staring at the darkened sky, a look of contentment on her face that cut me to the bone. When she came inside, I asked her who she was talking to. She didn't hesitate. She told me it was her sister discussing a baby shower. It was a lie. Her sister had been out of the country for a month. She didn't know I knew that. She didn't know I had liked her sister's vacation photos on social media an hour earlier. In that moment, the brother defense crumbled. A sister doesn't lie about talking to a sister. A lie implies guilt. A lie implies a secret that needs to be kept. I realized then that Elena wasn't just distancing herself. She was actively constructing a parallel reality where I had no place, and she was guarding the gates with deceit. The incident with the phone call in the backyard was the catalyst, but it was the event that followed a week later that solidified my resolve to find the truth. It was our 5th wedding anniversary. I had made reservations at a restaurant we had been dying to try for months, securing a table with a view of the city skyline. I bought her a bracelet, something delicate and expensive, hoping the gesture might pierce the armor she had built around herself. That afternoon, I sent her a text reminding her to be ready by 7. She replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. At 6:30, I was showered, dressed in a suit, waiting in the living room. 7 o'clock came and went. At 7:15, I heard the garage door open. Elena walked in, looking flustered, her hair slightly disheveled. She was carrying a bag of takeout food. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me sitting there in my suit. The guilt washed over her face instantly, followed quickly by a look of annoyance. She asked me why I was dressed up. I reminded her of our anniversary. She let out a dramatic sigh, claiming that because of the major project launch at work, the date had completely slipped her mind. She said she had assumed we were just doing a quiet dinner at home. She held up the takeout bag as if it were a peace offering. I stared at her, devastated. We had talked about this reservation weeks ago. We had discussed it. It wasn't a surprise. It was a plan. For her to forget was one thing, but for her to stand there and act as if I were the one making unreasonable demands was another. Then, her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't look at it. She didn't pick it up. She just stared at me, waiting for me to back down, to accept the takeout and the apology. But the buzz was persistent, followed by a second, then a third. It was a signal. Someone was demanding her attention. She glanced at the screen, and for a split second, her expression softened. She muttered something about an emergency at the office. I asked her if it was Marcus. She snapped at me, asking why I had to make everything about him. She said he was just a coworker, a friend, and that he was stressed about the launch. She told me she needed to take the call in the other room. I watched her walk away, the anniversary dinner forgotten on the counter, the bracelet burning a hole in my pocket. She didn't go to the office. She went into the guest bedroom and locked the door. I didn't follow her. I didn't scream or bang on the door. I just stood there in the silence of our kitchen, listening to the muffled sound of her voice through the wood. She wasn't talking about project management or coding or software launches. She was giggling. The contrast between the cold dismissal she had given me and the warmth she was giving whoever was on the other end of that line was violent. It was in that moment of quiet humiliation that I knew I couldn't live in the gray anymore. I needed black and white. I needed to know what she was saying when she thought I couldn't hear. The opportunity presented itself 2 days later. It was a Tuesday, and the atmosphere in the house was still thick with the tension from the ruined anniversary. We were barely speaking, coexisting in a state of armed neutrality. Elena had gone to take a shower after the gym. She had left her phone on the bathroom counter, a habit she used to have but had recently abandoned, keeping it glued to her person. Today, however, she must have felt secure enough to leave it unattended for 20 minutes. I walked past the bathroom door. The water was running, the sound of the shower creating a white noise that filled the house. I paused. I knew it was wrong. I knew that invading her privacy was a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. But the memory of her laughter in the guest room, the lies about the sister, the dismissal of our life together, it all propelled me forward. I pushed the door open just an inch. The steam from the shower billowed out, carrying the scent of her eucalyptus body wash. The phone was lying screen up on the marble vanity. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly. I didn't intend to unlock it. I didn't know her passcode anymore. She had changed it 6 months ago, right around the time Marcus became a daily topic of conversation. I just wanted to see if there were any notifications, any names on the screen that would give me the ammunition I needed to confront her. As my fingers grazed the cold metal of the device, the screen lit up. But it wasn't a notification. It was a voicemail screen. It appeared that she had been listening to a message and had paused it just before getting into the shower. My movement must have disturbed the sensor or the touchscreen, because suddenly, the audio resumed playing. It was connected to a portable Bluetooth speaker she kept on the counter for music. The voice that filled the humid room made the blood drain from my face so fast I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from falling. It wasn't Marcus's voice. It wasn't a male voice at all. It was my voice. I was listening to myself. It was a recording of me talking in my sleep. I knew this because I remembered the dream. I had been having a nightmare about our old college apartment building catching fire. I was shouting for Elena to wake up to get out. But in the recording, I wasn't shouting. I was muttering, my voice thick and slurred, repeating her name over and over again. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Why did she have a recording of me sleeping? Why was she listening to it? Then, the recording cut off, and a second audio file began to play immediately after. This time, it was me from a different day. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, humming a tune I didn't even know I knew. Then a third clip. It was my voice from a phone conversation I had with my mother last week. I pulled my hand back as if the phone were radioactive. The water in the shower shut off. The sudden silence was deafening. I quickly backed out of the bathroom, closing the door softly, my mind racing. I hadn't just found evidence of an affair. I had stumbled into something far more bizarre and terrifying. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was studying me. She was cataloging my voice, my mannerisms, my subconscious utterances. But why? To what end? The brother excuse suddenly seemed like a pathetic cover for a dynamic that was infinitely darker than I had imagined. I retreated to the study, locking the door behind me, waiting for her to emerge, needing to look at her with new eyes. The rest of the day passed in a surreal blur. I watched Elena move through the house with a sense of detached horror. Every action I had once viewed as normal now seemed calculated, rehearsed. When she spoke to me, I found myself analyzing her intonation, looking for mimicry. When she laughed at a sitcom, I wondered if she was timing it to match the laugh track, or if she was measuring my reaction. That night, the bed felt like a battleground. Elena fell asleep quickly, her breathing rhythmic and deep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the events of the bathroom playing on an endless loop in my mind. The recording of my sleep talking was the most disturbing part. It was intimate, a violation of the sanctuary of sleep. It implied that she was watching me, listening to me, in my most vulnerable state. I needed to know more. I needed to see the files. Waiting until she was deeply asleep, I slid out from under the covers. I moved silently to the nightstand where she usually placed her phone. Tonight, it was charging. I carefully unplugged the cable, holding my breath. The screen lit up, asking for the passcode. I tried our anniversary. Incorrect. I tried her birthday. Incorrect. I tried the password she used for our shared Netflix account. Incorrect. I stood there, the light from the screen illuminating my frustration. Then, I remembered something Marcus had done. She had mentioned once that Marcus had a terrible memory for numbers, so he used a pattern lock instead of a pin. I looked at the smudges on the glass, the oily residue of her fingers. There was a distinct pattern, an L shape starting at the top left. I swiped my finger tentatively, tracing the shape. The phone unlocked. I nearly dropped it. I turned the brightness down to the lowest setting and navigated to her apps. There were no hidden folders, no vault apps with generic icons. She was smarter than that. I went to her cloud storage app, the one she used for work files. It required a second login, but the autofill feature populated the fields. I held my breath as the files loaded. There was a folder labeled Project Echo. My stomach turned over. I opened it. It contained hundreds of audio files, all dated and time-stamped. There were videos, too. I clicked on one from last Tuesday. It was a video of me sitting in the backyard, reading a book. It was filmed from inside the house, through the sliding glass door. The zoom was precise, focusing on my micro-expressions as I read. I scrolled further down. There were documents, text files. I opened one titled Subject Analysis, Michael. The content made my blood run cold. It was a detailed breakdown of my psychological profile. Subject displays high levels of empathy. Subject responds well to physical touch, but withdraws under direct confrontation. Vocal analysis. Subject tends to raise pitch slightly when anxious. Speech patterns. Subject pauses for 1.5 seconds before lying about emotional distress. It went on for pages. My lekjes, my dislikes, my triggers, my stories. It was a manual on how to be me. And at the bottom of the document, there was a section for replication progress. It listed percentages next to various traits. Gait, 85%. Vocabulary, 92%. Humor, 60%. This wasn't just an affair. It was a replacement. Marcus wasn't just her lover. He was her project. She was teaching him how to be me. She was stripping me of my identity and transferring it to him, pixel by pixel, syllable by syllable. I felt like I was standing over my own open grave, reading the eulogy she had written for the life I was still living. The discovery of Project Echo fundamentally broke me, but it also ignited a cold, hard clarity. I spent the next few days operating on autopilot, going to work, coming home, smiling at Elena, all while the sibling dynamic played out in front of me. But now I saw the mechanics of it. I watched Marcus when he came by to pick up some files one evening. He stood in the doorway, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. It was a nervous tic I had. I watched him laugh at something Elena said. The inflection at the end of the laugh, the slight tilt of his head, it was mine. He was wearing a jacket that looked remarkably similar to one I owned, but slightly newer, better fitted. He wasn't just copying me. He was curating the best parts of me, the Michael 2.0 that Elena had always wanted. I realized that Elena wasn't just bored with me. She was dissatisfied with the reality of who I was. I had flaws. I got moody, I left dishes in the sink, I sometimes forgot to listen. She had found a man who looked somewhat like me. Physically, we had a similar build, and was systematically scrubbing him of his own personality, replacing it with a curated, algorithmic version of mine. It was a grotesque experiment. She was playing God with human emotion, trying to mold a perfect partner from clay that already had a soul of its own. I needed to know how deep this went. I accessed the cloud files again from my work computer, downloading everything before she could notice any activity on her account. I found video logs of their sessions. They weren't having sex in the videos. They were rehearsing. Elena would feed Marcus a line, and he would repeat it, adjusting his tone. No, softer, she would say. You need to sound more supportive, less aggressive. That's how Michael handles it. It was chilling. She was directing him in the role of a lifetime, my life. They discuss my reactions to hypothetical situations. If he gets a flat tire, he gets quiet. He doesn't yell. You need to learn to go inward, she instructed him. And then I found the final piece of the puzzle. A calendar entry dated for next month. It was labeled Transition Phase. The notes beneath it were brief, but terrifyingly efficient. Initiate separation. cause minimal conflict to preserve subjects' cooperation regarding assets. Target move-in date, 60 days post-separation. She was planning to leave me. Not just leave me, but to replace me so seamlessly that our friends, our neighbors, maybe even my own family wouldn't immediately notice the difference. She wanted the life we had built, the house, the social standing, but she wanted it with a version of me that she could control entirely. She loved the idea of me, just not the reality. And Marcus was the vessel she had chosen to carry that illusion forward. I wasn't losing my wife to another man. I was being phased out like an obsolete piece of software. I didn't confront her with a dramatic scene. There was no shouting, no throwing of clothes onto the lawn. That was what she expected. That was subject behavior, according to her profile. I knew that if I reacted with emotion, she would file it away as Michael is being unstable, validating her decision to leave. Instead, I waited. I spent 3 days observing, gathering evidence, and securing my legal position. I transferred my half of our savings to an account she couldn't touch. I contacted a lawyer. I printed the project echo files. The proof of her psychological manipulation and the planned asset transfer was undeniable. On a Thursday morning, while Elena was in the shower and Marcus was likely at his desk, learning how to take his coffee like I do, I packed my bags. I didn't take much, just my clothes, my laptop, and the hard drive containing the evidence of her betrayal. I left the bracelet I had bought for our anniversary on the kitchen counter, right next to the cold, uneaten takeout from the night of our anniversary. I wrote a letter. I didn't pour my heart out. I didn't beg for her to choose me. I simply wrote, I know about Project Echo. I know you're not replacing me because I wasn't enough, but because you think you can build something better. You can't have my life, Elena. It's not a script for you to rewrite. I'm gone. Don't look for me. I walked out of the house we had shared, the door clicking shut behind me with a finality that echoed through the empty rooms. I got in my car and drove away, watching the white picket fence fade in the rearview mirror. I felt lighter than I had in months. A week later, the divorce papers were served. Her lawyer called mine, baffled by the lack of contest, asking for a settlement meeting. I agreed, but only on my terms. When Elena saw me, she looked terrible. The polish was gone, the veneer of control cracked. She tried to give me the brother speech again, her eyes pleading, claiming it was all just a misunderstanding, a coping mechanism for her stress. I didn't say a word. I just placed the printed transcript of Marcus's voice training on the table between us. I watched her face as she read her own instructions to him. Lines like, lower your register to match Michael's resonance. The color drained from her face. She saw her own madness reflected back at her in black and white. She realized that I wasn't just a victim of her affair. I was the witness to her insanity. She signed the papers. She gave me the house. She just wanted the nightmare to end. I sold the house a month later. I took the money and moved across the country to a city where no one knew the name Michael or the woman who tried to replicate him. I changed my number, my routine, and my life. I occasionally wonder if she and Marcus stayed together or if the illusion shattered once the original model was gone. It doesn't matter. I am no longer a subject in her experiment. I am free,